In the spring of 1945, the war in Europe was reaching its violent conclusion, and all roads led to Berlin. Once the proud capital of the Third Reich, the city now stood battered, isolated, and surrounded. Adolf Hitler had promised a 1,000-year empire, yet it had lasted little more than 12 years. As Allied forces closed in from every direction, Berlin became the final battlefield where the fate of Nazi Germany would be decided. From the east, the Red Army advanced with overwhelming strength, determined to avenge years of destruction and suffering inflicted by the German invasion of the Soviet Union. From the west, British and American armies had already crossed the Rhine, but Berlin itself was left to the Soviets by agreement among the Allies. By April, the city was filled with refugees, wounded soldiers and civilians sheltering in cellars, while the Nazi leadership prepared for a last stand that few believed could succeed. On April 16, 1945, the Soviet assault began. More than 2 million Soviet soldiers, supported by thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft, launched a massive offensive toward Berlin. The opening bombardment lit the night sky, shaking the ground and signaling the beginning of the end. German defenses were thin and exhausted. Many units were made up of elderly men, teenagers from the Hitler Youth, and remnants of shattered divisions pulled back from the front. Despite desperate orders to hold every street and every building, the imbalance of power was overwhelming. As Soviet forces pushed forward, they encountered fierce resistance in places, but the German lines steadily collapsed. By April 23, Berlin was encircled, completely cut off from the outside world. Inside the city, conditions rapidly worsened. Food and ammunition were scarce, water and electricity failed, and constant shelling turned entire neighborhoods into ruins. Civilians hid underground as street fighting raged above them, while fires burned unchecked. Soviet troops advanced block by block, often engaging in brutal close-quarters combat. Tanks fired at point-blank range, artillery pounded strongpoints, and snipers hunted from shattered buildings. Every bridge, intersection, and government building became a battlefield. The cost in lives was immense on both sides, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Berlin was dying, and with it, the Nazi regime. Deep beneath the city in the Führerbunker, Adolf Hitler remained, isolated from reality and surrounded by loyal followers. Despite clear evidence of defeat, he refused to surrender. As Soviet forces drew closer, Hitler issued meaningless orders to armies that no longer existed. On April 29, he married Eva Braun in a brief ceremony, a final personal act amid the collapse of his empire. The next day, April 30, 1945, with Soviet troops fighting only a few hundred meters away, Hitler took his own life. His body was burned in the garden of the Reich Chancellery, as he had ordered, to prevent it from being displayed by the enemy. The symbol of Nazi power was gone, but the fighting in Berlin continued. After Hitler's death, command passed to Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, who sought to save what remained of Germany by surrendering to the Western Allies while continuing resistance in the East. In Berlin, however, there was no escape. On May 1, Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, also committed suicide after killing his children, an act that reflected the fanaticism and moral collapse at the heart of the regime. German defenders were exhausted, leaderless, and surrounded. Soviet forces tightened their grip on the city, capturing key landmarks including the Reichstag, which became a powerful symbol of victory. On its shattered walls, Soviet soldiers left graffiti marking the end of the long and brutal war. In the early hours of May 2, 1945, the remaining German forces in Berlin formally surrendered. The guns fell silent and the siege was over. The city lay in ruins, with tens of thousands dead, both soldiers and civilians. Berlin was a landscape of destruction, its streets filled with rubble, burned-out vehicles, and shattered buildings. For the Soviet Union, the victory came at an enormous cost, but it marked the defeat of its greatest enemy. For Germany, the fall of Berlin meant total collapse. Within days, on May 7, Germany surrendered unconditionally to the Allied powers, bringing the war in Europe to an end. The Siege of Berlin was more than the final battle of the Second World War in Europe. It was the dramatic conclusion of a regime built on violence, ideology, and terror. The city's destruction reflected the consequences of total war and the price paid for aggressive ambition. As the smoke cleared, Berlin became a symbol of both defeat and transformation. From its ruins would emerge a divided city, standing at the center of a new global conflict known as the Cold War. The thousand-year Reich had ended not in glory, but in rubble, silence, and surrender, leaving behind a powerful lesson about the rise and fall of tyranny.